Hello, I'm Grace, and I'm 78 years old. After a lifetime of silence, I need you to hear my story. The night my father drugged my tea, I was 16. I remember the taste bitter, not quite right, even drowned in sugar and milk. I remember how my hand shook as I held the cup, how my father's shadow filled the doorway. He smiled. He always smiled, especially when he wanted something I didn't want to give. "You'll feel better after this," he whispered, and for a moment I almost believed him. That's the trouble with living your whole life inside a lie. You forget what's normal, what's safe, what a father's love should feel like. The world blurred at the edges. My body grew heavy, as if I were sinking into the bed itself. I tried to cry out, but my voice curled up inside my mouth and died there. I saw my father's face above me. I heard the sound of his belt unbuckling. I was awake. I was awake for all of it. Outside, the street was silent. 'Tis everything I believed about family shattered at once. People think these things happen to other people, to strangers in news stories. But I am not a stranger. I am Grace. I have lived with this story pressed against my ribs for over 60 years. The question is not what happened that night, though I will tell you. The real question is how you go on breathing after the person who should have loved you most becomes the reason you want to disappear. If you're listening now, I'd love to know, where are you hearing this story from? Maybe you're in your own kitchen or somewhere you feel safe, or maybe you're not sure yet. Leave a comment below and tell me where you are, or simply let me know you're here. And please, stay with me. This isn't an easy story to tell, but you might find a piece of yourself in it too. You are not alone. This is my truth. This is where it began and ended all at once. I was about 11 when I first noticed something was wrong. At that age, you still believe your world is small and safe. You think the people who feed you and tuck you in at night are incapable of harm. And yet, looking back, I realized the sins were already there, tiny cracks in the wallpaper of our family. It began quietly. One evening after school, I was in the bath. The bathroom door didn't have a proper lock. It was just a latch, really, easily undone from the outside. Mom was busy mending a neighbor's dress in the kitchen, humming along to the radio. Suddenly, Dad opened the door without knocking. He smiled, said he just needed to check the taps, but he stood there a bit too long. I remember clutching the flannel to my chest, not sure why I felt so exposed. After that, there were little things that made me feel odd. Dad started hugging me longer than before, his hands pressing firmly against my back. Sometimes he'd kiss my hair, lingering just a second too long, or let his hand rest at my waist in a way that made my skin prickle. If I squirmed or pulled away, he'd chuckle and say, "Don't be silly, Grace, I'm your dad." I wanted to believe him. After all, wasn't I the miracle child, the one he carried on his shoulders in the park? But something in me tensed every time he came near. I found myself avoiding him, taking longer to tidy my room, staying out in the garden, making excuses to go round to a friend's house. One Sunday afternoon, as we walked home from church, Dad reached out and squeezed my shoulder. "You're growing up fast," he said, and I felt a shiver run through me. I didn't understand why it felt so wrong. I told myself it was just my imagination. Mom never saw. She was always busy, always focused on work, her hands and mind occupied. If she noticed me shrinking from Dad's touch, she never mentioned it. And I was too ashamed to tell her. I worried she'd be angry with me, or worse, that she'd think I was making trouble. So I kept silent. I learned to move quietly through the house, to anticipate Dad's footsteps and close my bedroom door just in time. I'd flinch when he entered a room, my body remembering things I didn't dare put into words. At night, I'd lie awake and replay every moment in my head, trying to work out if I was the problem, if I'd done something to cause his affection to twist. I stopped inviting friends round, afraid they might notice something I was desperate to ignore. School became my sanctuary, even though my marks started to slip. Teachers would ask if I was tired or unwell. I'd nod and smile and say, "Just a bit run down, miss." I got good at hiding things. It felt safer not to say anything at all. If you're listening, you might wonder why I never spoke up. The truth is, when the boundaries shift inside your own home, it's easier to believe you're imagining it, easier to think you're at fault, or that no one would believe you anyway. I was a quiet child. I learned to carry my confusion alone. And as the years slipped by, so did my sense of safety. The house grew colder, the air heavier. I kept waiting for things to go back to normal, but normal never came back. After that, things didn't get better. They only grew stranger, heavier, more confusing. My father's affection, what used to feel ordinary, shifted into something I dreaded. The touches became more frequent and less easy to explain away. He'd find reasons to be alone with me, fixing a loose button on my cardigan, helping me with a splinter, or brushing a stray hair from my face. Each gesture was small, but together they crowded out any comfort I'd once found in his presence. He became bolder in his routines. Sometimes, when Mum was working late into the evening, he'd call me into the living room, pat the space beside him on the sofa, and wrap me in his arms under a blanket. "It's just a cuddle, Grace," he'd say, his breath hot against my ear. "You're my special girl. It's our little secret, all right." I hated that phrase, our little secret. It stuck to me like oil, slippery and hard to wash away. I learned quickly that there was no point protesting. The first time I tried, his eyes turned cold, and he warned, "If you tell anyone, you'll break your mother's heart. She'd never forgive you." The words burrowed deep. I could never hurt my mom, so I gave in. I became skilled at drifting away inside myself. I'd stare at the flicker of the gas fire, count the seconds, try to become invisible while he held me. I built imaginary walls in my mind, fields of wildflowers, distant beaches, clouds drifting across an endless sky. Sometimes it almost worked. Sometimes I could forget where I was for a while. The patterns repeated, week after week, month after month. Dad found ways to blur every boundary I had. He'd slip into my room at night, footsteps soft on the carpet. I started sleeping with Rosie, my old doll, clutched to my chest, long after I was too old for toys. The scent of her faded fabric became my only comfort. School became a refuge. But even there, I was different. I stopped answering questions in class. My grades began to fall. I lost weight. My teachers noticed, but put it down to just a phase. I wished it was. My friendships faded too. I couldn't look my friends in the eye. I stopped inviting anyone over. I was terrified someone would see the truth in the tightness of my smile, the way I flinched when someone brushed past me in the corridor. Mum's world shrank with work and exhaustion. She missed meals, missed the clues. Sometimes she'd pause, brush the hair from my face and say, "You're looking a bit peaky, love. Are you getting enough sleep?" I'd nod, lie, and say I was fine. It was easier than the truth. At night, I barely slept. I'd lie awake, staring at the patch of streetlight on my ceiling, listening for Dad's footsteps on the landing. My chest felt squeezed by a band of iron, my stomach knotted with a dread I couldn't explain to anyone. Sometimes I'd cry into my pillow as quietly as possible. There was never anyone to hear. I tried everything to stay safe. I'd lock my door, jam a chair under the handle, but Dad always found a ways in. I learned to pretend I was asleep. I learned not to fight, not to make a sound. It made things easier, or at least it made them quicker. Every day became a game of survival. During the day, I played the good daughter, quiet, obedient, careful not to draw attention. At night, I was a shadow, holding my breath, waiting for it all to be over. I lived two separate lives, neither of which really belonged to me. The worst part was the silence, the feeling that even if I screamed, no one would hear. I began to wonder if this was just what happened to girls like me. If maybe I deserved it. If you've ever felt trapped by someone else's secrets, you'll know how small the world can feel. Like every room has thinner walls, every word carries a risk, every act of kindness might be turned against you. I was barely 13 and already I felt ancient, and still the cycle repeated. Always the same, always a little worse. It was in my 14th year that change, however small at first, began to push its way into my life. The summer was unremarkable in most ways, wet, cool mornings, the usual sound of post lorries and milk floats on the street. But something shifted when the O'Connors moved in across the road. Lucy was their only daughter, and she had a way of filling a room without even trying. Her laugh bounced off the garden walls. Her questions never seemed to run out. She made friends with me as if it were the most natural thing in the world. We started with walking to the bus stop, then sharing chocolate digestives behind the gym, then whole afternoons in her bedroom, sprawled on the floor with our homework spread between us. At Lucy's house, it was noisy, a bit messy, and there was always someone singing or burning toast. I liked the chaos. It felt alive. Lucy noticed things. She noticed how I flinched if anyone raised their voice. She saw me stare at the floor when teachers called my name. Once, when we were walking home, a car backfired and I nearly jumped out of my skin. Lucy just put her arm around my shoulder and said, "It's okay. You're safe. You're with me." Little by little, she asked more questions. At first, I brushed them off. I'd grown so used to hiding, I didn't even realize how much I hid, but Lucy had a gift for waiting. She never pushed, not really. She just stayed. One drizzly Tuesday, when Mum was working late, Lucy invited me to stay for tea. Her mum made shepherd's pie. I watched the family passing plates and jokes, the easy way Lucy's dad ruffled her hair, the way her mum told her off for talking with her mouth full, and then kissed her head anyway. It made my chest ache with longing. I realized, sitting there in the warm, noisy kitchen, how different life could be. After dinner, we went up to Lucy's room. She painted her toenails purple and told me about a boy at school who'd pulled a plet. I tried to listen, but my thoughts drifted. She caught me staring at nothing. "Grace," she asked quietly, lowering the polish brush. "Hey, can I ask you something?" You never want to come to mine on weekends. And you're always so jumpy when your dad's about. Did he ever hurt you?" I froze. The room seemed smaller, the air thick. I tried to laugh it off, but the sound was thin, brittle. "No, it's just Dad's strict, you know. He gets cross sometimes, but he doesn't mean it." Lucy didn't look away. "Grace, I've seen you when you think nobody's looking. The way you shrink when he touches your arm, the way you never want to go home." That was all it took. Something in me broke. The words spilled out before I could call them back. I told her about the nights I pretended to sleep, the times Dad said it was our secret, the fear that sat in my stomach every evening as it got dark. My hands shook. Lucy took them in hers, squeezing tightly. There were tears in her eyes. "It's not your fault," she said fiercely. "You hear me? None of this is your fault." For the first time, the shame eased just a fraction. "I can't tell anyone," I whispered. "It would ruin everything. My mom, she loves him. She'd never believe me." Lucy was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "If you want, I'll come with you, or I'll help you write it down. You can't keep this inside forever, Grace. Promise me you won't." I nodded, but the fear was still there. That night I barely slept, my mind spinning. I watched Mum, tired and distracted, bent over her sewing. I wondered if she had always known something was wrong and was simply too frightened to look. Over the next few weeks, Lucy checked in every day. She would ask, "Are you all right?" and mean it. Sometimes she slipped little notes into my bag. "I'm here. You're brave. It's not your fault." It gave me strength, but it also reminded me of the burden I carried. Slowly, small cracks began to show in our family's perfect surface. Mum started noticing my weight loss, my hollow eyes. She asked more questions, lingered longer when saying goodnight. I could feel her worry growing. Once I caught her watching Dad as he hugged me, a flicker of something unreadable in her gaze. Lucy and I made a plan. If I found the courage, I would tell Mum everything face to face. If I couldn't, I would write a letter and Lucy would help me deliver it. We picked a day the following Sunday after church, when Dad was meant to be at the allotment. The days leading up to it were the longest I can remember. Every night I rehearsed what I'd say. Every morning I lost my nerve. I watched Dad's shadow move along the landing, listened to Mum's soft snoring from down the hall, and wondered what my words might destroy. But Lucy's friendship was a lighthouse. Each message, each gentle nudge, a reminder that I didn't have to face this alone. Her belief in me was the beginning of my own. In the end, the chance to speak was taken out of my hands, because the truth, once set in motion, has a way of forcing itself into the light, whether you're ready or not. It happened on a Friday night, the sort of ordinary evening that should have been forgettable. Mum had gone to visit a neighbor who'd fallen ill. The house felt unusually quiet, the clock ticking too loudly in the hall, the street outside empty, under a bruised purple sky. I was in my room, trying to read but unable to focus. My stomach knotted tight with a worry I couldn't name. Dad knocked softly on my door, carrying a mug. "I've made you some tea," he said, his voice gentle, too gentle. "You look tired, love. This'll help you sleep." I hesitated, but I took it, because you do, don't you, when it's your father? The smell was wrong, sharp, something bitter beneath the chamomile. I wrapped my hands around the mug, hoping the warmth would settle my nerves. "Drink up," he urged, sitting on the edge of my bed. "It'll make you feel better." I sipped. The taste was foul, and I tried not to gag. My hands began to tremble. He watched me, eyes fixed and hungry, and I felt something inside me collapse. I wanted to run, to scream, but my limbs grew heavy as if lead had poured into my veins. My vision blurred at the edges. The room tilted. I tried to speak, to ask him what was happening, but my tongue felt thick and useless. I was aware of his hands guiding me to lie back, his voice soft, coaxing, promising it was all for my own good. I felt trapped inside my own body, able to see, to hear, but powerless to move. Some part of me floated above the bed, watching as my father's shadow moved closer, listening to the metallic sound of his belt, the hush of his breathing. I was awake. I was awake for all of it. The front door banged, sudden and sharp. Mum's voice drifted up the stairs, unexpected, urgent. Footsteps on the landing. The bedroom door swung open, and everything stopped. For a long, suspended second, no one spoke. I saw the shock on her face, the way she looked from me to Dad, the horror blooming in her eyes. She screamed his name, a sound I'd never heard from her before, raw and broken. "What are you doing? Get away from her!" Her hands shook. She reached for something on my desk, and in that moment, Dad stumbled back, startled, muttering excuses, his face pale and furious. Mum pushed between us, shielding me with her body. "Get out!" she spat, her voice trembling but strong. "You're not her father, not anymore. If you ever come near her again, I'll make sure everyone knows what you are." Dad faltered, as if he might argue, but something in Mum's eyes, fury, grief, love, all at once made him turn. He fled, slamming the front door so hard the windows rattled. Mum knelt beside me, her hands gentle on my face, tears running freely now. "Grace, my love, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't see sooner." I wanted to answer, to tell her everything, but the world was slipping away, the room swimming with shadows and light. That was the night the truth broke free. That was the night our lives changed forever. The next hours blurred together, lights too bright, voices too loud, everything happening faster than I could grasp. Mum called the police. She spoke in a voice I barely recognized, sharp and unyielding, telling them her husband had harmed her daughter. I remember the officers' faces, grim and professional as they asked questions I struggled to answer. My words were thick and slurred, the sedative still dragging me under, but I managed to tell them what Dad had done. For the first time, I saw disbelief in someone else's eyes give way to concern. They took me to the hospital that night. There were more questions, more examinations, nurses moving gently, trying to hide their pity. Blood tests confirmed the presence of something in my system, a sedative, stronger than anything I'd ever felt before. Mum stayed with me, gripping my hand so tightly I thought her fingers might bruise. She kept whispering, "I'm here. I'm not letting go. I'm so sorry." The doctors checked me for injuries, for signs of what Dad had done. I closed my eyes through most of it, wishing I could float away. Afterwards, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of bleach and lavender, I listened to the murmurs of voices outside the curtain. "We'll have to contact social services. She needs a safe place." I realized they were talking about me as if I wasn't in the room. Mom refused to leave my side. "She's coming home with me," she told anyone who'd listen. "We're going to get through this." The police came back the next morning, this time with a woman officer who sat quietly at the end of my bed and asked me to tell my story again in as much detail as I could. It hurt to speak the words out loud, to see them written down in a notebook, but the officer believed me. She promised they would keep me safe. Dad was arrested 2 days later, picked up at his brother's house across town. I never saw him again after that night, not in person. Mom had to go to court and give evidence. I was asked to give a statement, too, sitting in a small room with toys on the shelf and a tape recorder on the table. I remember the feeling of being both invisible and exposed, the knowledge that my story would now be judged by strangers. The legal process dragged on for months. There were hearings and appointments, endless waiting. The solicitor explained that Dad would likely go to prison, but that it would not erase what he'd done. Still, the day the sentence was announced a long term, enough to make sure he'd never come near us again, I felt a small, shaky relief settle inside me. The hardest part, in some ways, was coming home. News travels quickly in places like ours. Some neighbors offered sympathy, casseroles, kind words. Others avoided our eyes, whispering behind closed curtains. A few made it clear they thought Mom had overreacted, that these things should be kept in the family. Mom ignored them all, held her head high, and focused on me. There were follow-up visits from social workers, check-ins from a kindly who spoke softly and never pushed too hard. I began seeing a counselor, though for weeks I could barely speak. Mostly, I just sat in pillows, listening to the clock on the wall and the distant sound of traffic outside the window. Still, for the first time in years, there was hope, a fragile, tremulous hope that life might be something more than just survival. We left the house on Ashford Road not long after the trial. Too many memories haunted those walls, the smell of oil in the garage, the faded marks on the skirting board where Dad measured my height each birthday, the bedroom curtains Mom once sewed with such hope. There was relief in leaving, but a kind of grief too. Moving out felt like abandoning the last remnants of our old life, good and bad, tangled together. Mom found a small flat across town in a block built from pale brick with a communal garden out the back. It was nothing grand, 2 rooms, a tiny kitchen, the sound of buses in the morning, but it was ours. For the first time in years, I felt safe enough to sleep with my window open. We started new routines, little ones that helped anchor the days. Mom would set out 2 mugs each morning, boiling the kettle and humming quietly to herself. She took in sewing jobs from neighbors, piecing together dresses and school uniforms at the kitchen table. I went back to school, walking a new route each day, breathing in the unfamiliar streets. There were difficult days. Sometimes I'd find myself frozen in the supermarket, unable to choose a loaf of bread. At night, nightmares would leave me gasping, tangled in the bed sheets, heart pounding. On those nights, Mom would sit with me, brushing the hair from my face, whispering, "We're safe now, Grace. He can't hurt us anymore." The counselor encouraged me to write 3 things down every day, a memory, a feeling, something I was grateful for. It was harder than I expected, but I tried. The warmth of sunlight on my pillow, Mom's laughter over a burnt piece of toast, the first daffodils in the communal garden. Ticking off these small joys, I began to see life in color again. We made Sunday dinners a tradition, even if it was only beans on toast or a shared apple pie from the corner shop. Sometimes Lucy would visit, bringing stories from her new school and her trademark boisterous hugs. She'd remind me, with her stubborn optimism, that I was stronger than I thought. Mom worked hard to make our new home feel welcoming. She found a scrap of floral fabric at the market and made new curtains for my room. She put up shelves for my books and drawings. On weekends, we'd walk by the canal, feeding ducks and letting the cold air clear our minds. Each day, I found it a little easier to breathe. The weight on my chest grew lighter. Trust was slow in returning, but it came first in Mom, then in Lucy, then in myself. I learned to take up space again, to laugh, to speak, to believe that the future might hold something good. Day by day, we reclaimed our breath, and while scars remained, they no longer defined me. I was no longer just a survivor. I was a daughter, a friend, a girl who dared to dream again. Years passed, quietly at first, each one layering distance between us and that old house, that old pain. Mom kept her promise to protect, to believe, to never let silence win again. She worked hard, always, but she learned to rest too, to laugh with friends, to knit herself scarves in bright colors just because she could. I finished school, went to college, and found a world that was bigger and kinder than I'd ever expected. I studied literature, losing myself in books and stories, discovering new ways to make sense of my own. For the first time, I believed the future might be something I could choose for myself. There was love, eventually a gentle, patient man named Edward who never asked for more than I could give, who waited until I was ready to trust. With him, I learned that kindness could be real, that not all touch had to hurt, that a family could be built on something other than fear. Mom grew older, her hair turning silver, her hands softer with each passing year. When she fell ill, I cared for her as she had cared for me, reading aloud to her, sitting in the kitchen as she sipped weak tea and watched the rain streak down the windows. On her last night, she took my hand and said, "You're my bravest girl, Grace. Never forget that." Her passing was gentle, but the loss was sharp, an ache that settled deep in my bones. I mourned for her and for all the things she never got to have. But I carried her lessons forward, to speak, to love fiercely, to draw boundaries, and stand by them. Now, all these years later, I am both daughter and mother. I raised my own children in a house filled with laughter and honesty, determined that they would never doubt their safety, never wonder if love came with strings attached. I told them, when the time was right, that our family had known darkness once, but that we chose to let in the light. This is the legacy my mother gave me, not just survival, but the power to begin again, the courage to tell the truth, the strength to believe that healing is possible, not perfect, but real. For anyone listening now, this is what I want you to know. You're not defined by what was done to you. You are allowed to set your own boundaries. You are allowed to hope. And you are never, ever alone. If you've listened all the way to this point, thank you. I know this story wasn't easy. Maybe you recognize something of yourself or someone you love in my words. Maybe you've carried your own silence for years, believing no one would understand. Tonight, As you finish this, I want you to do 2 small things just for you. First, take a moment to breathe. Notice the space you're in. Remind yourself that you made it through every day you thought you couldn't. That's courage, even if it never felt heroic. Second, if you feel safe, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from. Maybe you're in your kitchen on a rainy London night, or curled up in a small flat miles away from anyone who knows your history. Perhaps you want to share a piece of your own story, or just a single word, safe, healing, to remind someone else that they're not alone either. You might type, "This week, my boundary is," and fill in the rest, or simply say, "I'm with you." Our scars don't make us weak. They are proof that we survived and that we are still here. Thank you for sitting with me, for listening, for believing in second chances. Stay, breathe, hope,